The kingdom learned to whisper because the thorns listened. They grew first as rumors do, thin, green, almost polite. A loop around the oldest well, a braid along the lowest wall, a curious hand on the gate. Then they learned the taste of iron and sky. They X-rayed the air with spines, climbed the towers like careful fire, and stitched the whole country to its sleep. Before all that, there was a wish, and the price of it. A king and a queen did what hopeful people do. They threw a feast and invited wisdom. Some of it came dressed as midwives with clean hands. Some of it came on pages that had waited for thumbs. Some of it arrived wearing a dress the color of rain and a mouth that did not smile because it had learned other uses for itself. They set 12 places for the women of the hills, keepers of herbs and storms, and the old language of needlework, and forgot a 13th either by accident or because fear and pride are the same color in certain halls. The uninvited arrived anyway. She walked down the center of the tablecloth, barefoot, as if checking the stitching, and touched the infant's cheek with a fingertip made wise by nettles. "A name?" she asked. "Rosamund," the queen said, because the child's hair smelled faintly of roses, and the queen wanted her daughter to belong to softness. "Very well," said the 13th, whose name was older than the meadow. "She will grow with grace and good hunger. On the day she learns what sharpness is, a spindle will remind her. She will sleep, and so will you. None will die. The world will simply be asked to wait." "Wait how long?" asked the king, because kings think in schedules and battlements. "Until someone remembers there are other ways to open a door than a key and a command." Another of the wise women, one with hands that smelled of soap and bedding, stood and poured a calmer into the room. "It will be sleep," she said, not ending. "Let the girl be taught caution, but not fear. Hide spindle and wheel if you must. Better yet, teach her how to use them." The king heard hide, and because he was a father before he was a listener, he heard only that. Spindles were carried to the river like contraband and floated away. Wheels were broken in the courtyards with the embarrassed zeal of people who know they are destroying something useful but cannot admit it. The queen stood in the nursery window, and when the cart of wood and iron clattered past, she pressed a kiss into Rosamund's hair and did not say, "I learned to spin to fill the winter with warmth." Children grow along the grain of what they are given. Rosamund grew into the space her name made for her, rose and mouth, and the room between. She learned to navigate corridors and carefulness, to read the law of her parents' eyes, and the older law in the garden where ants carried logic across stone. She learned that dangerous things are also beautiful, and that beauty is rarely safe. On a day that would later become prophecy's proof, she followed a draft of cool air up a narrow stair. It curled like a ribbon, scent of oil and old wood. The tower at the end of the hall held a door that had meant to stay shut. Doors get tired of meaning. Inside, dust, a window the size of a shrug, a chair, and a wheel standing alone as if someone had left the sentence mid-word. A woman sat beside it, neither witch nor saint, just a person with a job. Her foot coaxed the pedal, the wheel answered in circles. On the spindle, a small storm of fiber waited to become thread. "May I try?" Rosamund asked, because curiosity is a form of courage. The woman nodded. She showed hands and rhythm, how to draw the wool, how not to pinch the future. Rosamund touched the line took her blood. It was a small thing, a needle's kiss, a ruby punctuation. But sleep entered the room as if invited after all. It lowered Rosamund to the floor like a parent does with a fevered child. It walked down the stairs and into the kitchens, where it caught a spoon mid-stir and told it to dream of soup. It leaned over the guards and folded their arms more comfortably. It touched the king and queen and hung a later sign on their worry. Outside the walls, it met the horses and taught them the softness of standing. And the thorns woke, not summoned by spite, but by service. They rose as a hedge does when hired to be a wall. They remembered the wild design of safety and enacted it with vines. They wound around stone and bell, soothed the sharpness of battlement with green, learned the geometry of tower and the patience of anchoring. Birds came to argue their way through and stayed to build small, perfect houses on the backs of danger. Time puts dust on everything except certain kinds of hunger. Many came with swords and certainties. The briar instructed them in a language they did not understand. This is not an enemy. This is a lesson. Some learned slowly, often on their backs, staring at a sky that refused to sympathize. Some never learned at all, and the thorns gave them back to the ground gently. The way a tailor folds cloth he knows he cannot use. 100 years is a figure poet's favor because it fits in the mouth. In truth, the measure was not in years, but in ripenings. The kingdom slept through the invention of new kinds of patience. The thorns grew intelligent with weather. The birds taught their children a wing beat that honored the map of spines. Silence became a kind of music. On an afternoon scraped clean by wind, a traveler came who did not look like an answer. Corin carried a coil of rope and a pruning knife, and the easy, unimpressed gait of a gardener's apprentice whose eye weighed everything by the shade it could offer. He had learned to tell a fruit tree when it wanted to be itself, and a rose when it wanted to be a story. At the edge of the hedge, an old woman sold pears and warnings. Corin bought both. "Not with steel," she said, nodding toward the briar. "You'll make it angry, like any living thing." "How then?" he asked. "Cut what is dead. Leave what protects. Give back more than you take. Listen to the wind. It already knows the path." He walked the perimeter for a day. He noticed where birds slipped through, where spider silk did not cross, where the thorn tips were last week's red, and where they had darkened to this week's black. That night he slept under a sky without ceilings and dreamed of a wheel turning thread into bridge. In the morning he began. He did not hack. He edited. He removed the brittle and fed it to a small, respectful fire. He lifted a living vine and asked it to move, and sometimes it did. When a thorn bit him, he inquired whether it was a toll. If it was, he paid. The birds judged his grammar and allowed him conditional verbs. He reached the wall after 3 days and a morning. The wall did not ask for proof. The vines peeled back as if showing him a scar. Inside the castle was the word hush made architecture. Dust hovered like a thought nobody wanted to finish. People slept in elegant mischief. A maid mid-smile, the queen mid-worry, a boy with flour in his hair, and dreams likely stuck to his sleeves. Corin passed them as one passes a row of portraits, feeling watched by futures. In the great hall, a long loaf of bread had risen past reason and into a metaphor for patience. He climbed the narrow stair the wind had pointed at. The door was closed, not locked. Locks are for the waking. Inside, a girl lay as if the floor had opened a secret door only she could see. Her hair had made its own decisions on the stone. The spindle that had hired sleep lay beside her, sated. Corin, who had been asked many times in his work to cut living things for their health, did not touch her. He looked around the room and found what time leaves: a notebook, a shawl, a cup with the shadow of milk. He sat and read the pages covered in a young hand, lists of tiny wonders, drawings of leaves, the mathematics of daylight, the names she had given to small birds that do not keep the names humans give. He learned her better than some husbands learn their wives. He learned enough to know that learning is not ownership. He picked up the spindle, the thread waiting on it, had dried into a question. He placed it back on the wheel, set his foot to the pedal, and, slowly, respecting the room's wild contract, turned. The wheel complained, and then remembered. The thread took the twist it had always wanted. When the length she'd started became length completed, the light in the window changed its opinion of the dust. Rosamund's hand twitched. Not in a fairytale flinch, but like a person who has slept longer than they meant and is deciding how to forgive morning. Her eyes opened to a world that had been practicing its apology for a century. She sat up, winced at the pin in her leg that was not a pin, and looked at the stranger in a gardener's shirt, turning her mistake into a line. "Hello," she said, because she had been well raised. "Hello," he said, because he had been. "Are you a prince?" she asked, because stories are stubborn even when their bones are wrong. "No," he said, "I prune things." She looked at the spindle and then at the window, where a vine stood holding small leaves like hands in an oath. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For finishing what I started," she said, and stood and proved that standing is a decision nobody else can make for you. The sleep unrolled from the castle like a rug turned right side out. The cooks found their spoons where they had left them and invented shouting anew. The king woke with tears already prepared and had no idea where to put them all. Outside, the hedge loosened its shoulders. Birds revised their maps. The thorns did not retreat. They repurposed. Protection learned to become border. Border learned to become garden. People always want to know about the kiss. Let it be ordinary. They did not rush at each other as if trying to make up for 100 years with one clumsy collision. They walked through the castle, Rosamund pointing out small things, chips and stone that looked like islands, a painting that had waited so long it now seemed patient instead of proud. In the kitchen, she cut the great, unreasonable loaf and handed Corin a piece. He laughed, and what came through his throat sounded a little like a gate opening. Later, in the garden, when the sun finally invented the afternoon properly, they kissed like an agreement is kissed, with understanding. The country did what waking countries do. It argued, it celebrated, it appointed committees. The queen declared the spinning wheel no longer banished. The women of the hills came down and taught the palace how to make thread that remembered kindness. The king sent for maps and found the borders had moved inward and then outward again, as if the land had learned to breathe on its own. Children grew up thinking thorns were what you trained into archways for weddings, not what you tore out of scalp and horse. Rosamund did not become a legend so much as a habit. She walked the hedge with pruning shears and a notebook, writing down what the thorns wanted now that they were not needed to draw blood. She asked them to become shade, and they considered it, and they did. She planted a long, long lane of cuttings taken from the patient hedge, and as they grew into an avenue of roses, people started to call it the kingdom's vein, not because it bled, but because it pulsed. Corin taught apprentices that cutting is not the same as solving. He let the young ones blunder and learn, and when they cried over saplings they had ruined with enthusiasm, he told them the only sentence that postpones despair. Time can fix this if you help. He and Rosamund argued about soil and policy, and who made the better bread until their hair remembered snow. And the thorns? They kept their memory. In certain lights, you could see the old anger sleeping inside their green, ready to rise again if the world forgot itself. Memory is not a threat. It is a guardrail. If you run your fingers along the arch of roses on a day with wind, the leaves will bump your knuckles, and you will understand something about boundaries that no law can teach you. If you want a moral, take this. Do not break what you can finish. Do not wake what you have not learned to listen to. Do not mistake a pause for a prison, and if you pass, years from now, beneath a bloom the color of apology, you may hear, if you have the right kind of wrist and the right kind of wind, the quiet pride of roots speaking the city's new language. We did not keep you out. We kept you safe until you remembered how to come in.